The air at Arlington was unnaturally still that morning, not just quiet trevorant, like the earth itself was holding its breath. Marble stones stood in endless lines across the hills, pale in the rising light. Each one bore a name, or sometimes only a word, unknown. Beneath the grand white canopy at the tomb of the unknown soldier, a lone guard stood like carved granite. His shoes gleamed, his rifle glinted, his every breath was invisible, swallowed by discipline. Tourists lined the black iron rail, murmuring only in whispers, afraid to pierce the silence. Cameras stayed low, even children stood still, wide-eyed, sensing they were in a place where time didn't dare to move. Then came the low growl of engines. Heads turned as a black convoy rolled to a halt at the plaza's edge. Doors swung open in perfect military choreography, and out stepped a tall, silver-haired man draped in medals and reputation a four-star general, long retired but still carrying the weight of war in every rigid line of his posture. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Everyone knew him, the living legend, the man who had once commanded armies on the far side of the world and who had later called public ceremonies like this one a waste of manpower. His voice had shaped policy, toppled commands, crushed careers. No one expected him here, of all places, and certainly not walking toward the guard. Boots struck marble like drumbeats as he advanced across the plaza. His aides lingered back, nervous. The general didn't glance at the crowd, nor at the cameras now tilting toward him. His gaze locked solely on the guard. The guard didn't move, not a blink, not a breath. His jawline was stone, his eyes fixed forward, as if the man approaching him didn't exist. The general stopped just a few paces away. For a long, suffocating moment, the world narrowed to two silhouettes, one unflinching figure in midnight blue dress, and one weathered warrior wrapped in stars. The crowd seemed to shrink back, instinctively knowing they were about to witness something unscripted, something raw. The general tilted his head, almost studying the guard like an artifact, like a puzzle that had defied him for decades. And then, softly but carrying in the cold air, he spoke. "Tell me," the general said, voice hard with command yet trembling just slightly, "what makes you stand here, as if nothing else matters?" The guard did not answer, not yet. The crowd thought he would step aside, but in the next moment, the world saw what honor truly means. The guard's name was Staff Sergeant Daniel Cole, though here, names were not worn. Here, individuality dissolved into ritual because this post wasn't about who you were, it was about who you stood for. Years before he donned the immaculate blue uniform of the old guard, Cole had been a dust-covered infantryman half a world away. Afghanistan, Kandahar province, patrols under a merciless sun, nights that were nothing but static and whispers on the radio. He was 21 when it happened, when the ambush tore through their convoy like a thunderclap. His best friend, Private First Class Jamie Rowe, had been sitting 3 feet from him in the armored vehicle. One heartbeat they were laughing about home, and the next, nothing, no breath, no words, just silence, and the ringing in Cole's ears. He remembered clutching Jamie's dog tag with hands still shaking from adrenaline. He remembered screaming until his voice cracked, and realizing no one could hear him over the roar of chaos. The silence afterward was worse. The quiet after the gunfire had weighed. It pressed down, seeped into him. It never left. Cole made it home, but the laughter didn't, neither did the sleep. Every day felt borrowed, undeserved. Survivor's guilt gnawed at him like rust on steel. For months, he drifted, hollowed out, until a mentor told him about a place where silence wasn't emptiness. It was on the tomb of the unknown soldier, the day he watched his first changing of the guard ceremony. Something in him locked into place. The perfection of it, the stillness, the impossibly sharp turns, the click of the rifle like a metronome of memory. It was as if these men were holding back time itself, refusing to let the fallen be forgotten. He applied to the sentinels. The training nearly broke him. Hours of relentless drilling, blisters on blisters, inspections so precise that a single speck of lint could end a career. But he endured, not because he wanted glory, but because he needed purpose now. Years later, his heart beat with mechanical precision as he stood guard. Every step, every pause, every breath he took belonged to those who could take no more. He stood for Jamie, that the man approaching him had once commanded whole nations, sons. General Marcus Raines, 4 stars, 35 years in uniform, fought in 2 wars, shaped 3, revered and feared in equal measure, where Cole was silence. Raines had been thunder. He had led armored divisions through deserts, orchestrated air campaigns like chess moves. His strategies were studied at the War College. His decisions had rewritten borders, but for all his triumphs, Rains was notorious for one thing: his disdain for ceremony. He saw tradition as theater sentiment that distracted from the hard calculus of war. Once, on live television, he'd said, "Wars are won by action, not by standing still with polished shoes." The remark had ignited fury among veterans. Arlington had bristled, but Rains hadn't flinched. He never did. After retirement, he'd vanished into think tanks and lecture halls, writing cold-blooded essays about efficiency and modernization. No one expected him to ever return here, to this ground of whispers and white stone. And yet here he was, boots echoing on sacred marble, striding toward the one figure who embodied everything he had mocked. The plaza itself seemed to resist his presence. Rows of white headstones stretched like silent witnesses up the grassy hillsides. The September light spilled across them like molten gold. A hush rolled through the gathered crowd as they recognized him, children clutching their parents' hands, veterans stiffening to attention out of reflex. Some lowered their cameras, unsure if they were allowed to film this, because this place was not meant for spectacle. This was not a stage. The tomb of the unknown soldier stood on its raised platform, blank yet impossibly heavy, engraved with the words, "Here rests in honored glory an American soldier known but to God." It was more than a grave. It was a promise that even the lost would never be forgotten. That silence could be louder than history books, and it was here that Cole had chosen to rebuild himself, step by flawless step. The moment Rains appeared, Cole's peripheral vision registered the stir of movement at the plaza's edge, the hush that rippled across the crowd. But his eyes did not shift. They never could. His discipline wrapped around him like armor. Inside, though, his heart began its slow, measured drumbeat. He knew this man. He knew the voice that once called men like him expendable. The speeches about how ritual belonged in museums, not in a living army. Rains had dismissed tomb guards as ceremonial mannequins. Cole had read the words years ago, clenched jaw and trembling hands, then buried the anger beneath layers of ritual until it hardened into something colder than steel. And now the man who had said those words was here, walking toward him, uninvited, unexpected. Unblinking. The guard stayed frozen, because that was his duty. But somewhere deep inside, the broken soldier who still clutched a friend's dog tag in the back of his mind stirred awake. And across the plaza, the legend who had once commanded entire wars slowed his pace as he entered the invisible ring of sacred silence. The ring where no one spoke, no one breathed, and no one dared to challenge the watch. The two men's paths, carved by loss and pride, were finally about to collide, and the world, though it didn't know it yet, was about to hear words that would crack even the hardest soldier's armor. The first sound was the slow, deliberate click of the general's heel striking marble, then another. Each step was measured, but somehow still felt like a threat. The crowd instinctively shifted back, forming a crescent along the plaza's black rail. Phones rose hesitantly. A few tourists glanced at the uniformed Arlington security posted near the edges, but even they stood frozen, uncertain whether to intervene. This was no protester. This was General Marcus Rains, a man whose mere presence once made entire battalions straighten their backs, and now he was walking straight into the sacred zone, eyes locked on the silent guard who stood like a pillar of stone. Cole did not flinch. He couldn't. Sentinels were trained for this exact thing: to ignore distractions, insults, shouts, even thrown objects, to stand unshaken as the embodiment of honor. Still, his pulse drummed with icy clarity, each beat echoing like the click of his rifle's bolt. His mind emptied, flowing back into the mantra drilled into every guard. "My standard will remain perfection." Rains stopped barely 6 feet away. The air between them felt electric, crackling with something older than rivalry, the collision of two opposite creeds. One preached efficiency through motion, the other meaning through stillness. "Impressive," Rains said at last, his voice low but carrying across the marble. "Immaculate boots, flawless posture, not a muscle out of place." He let the words linger, almost like a compliment. Then he smiled, a thin, cold slice of disdain. "But tell me, do you actually do anything?" Gasps slipped from a few throats in the crowd. A little boy's hand tightened around his father's sleeve. Two veterans near the railing went rigid, jaws locking like trap springs. Someone's camera clicked in the silence. Cole didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed, gaze locked down the invisible line above the crowd, as if Rains weren't even there. That silence was his armor. Rains began circling him slowly, boots scraping marble, voice sharpening. "I led real soldiers," he continued, "men who fought, bled, and kept moving. They didn't have the luxury of standing still, They didn't play dress-up while others carried the weight. The words struck like hammer blows, but Cole's breathing never faltered. His shoulders remained square. His chin stayed lifted precisely 5 degrees above level. The faint glint of the tomb badge on his chest caught the sun like a frozen tear. "You think this honors them?" Rains said, stopping in front of him again. "You think silence honors the dead? Silence forgets them. Silence buries them twice." A ripple moved through the crowd. Anger, shock, disbelief. One older woman in a folded flag pin whispered, "How dare he?" through trembling lips. A teenage girl near her lowered her phone, unable to film anymore. Rains turned his head just enough to scan the audience, as if daring someone to speak up. No one did. No one could. Cole's peripheral vision caught none of it. He was the eye of the storm, and yet beneath his mask of composure, old ghosts stirred. Jamie's laugh, Jamie's scream, the roar of fire, and the ringing silence after. He locked his jaw tighter, grounding himself in ritual. 20-1 steps. Pause. Turn. 21 steps. Not yet. He would not break rhythm. Not for this man. Not for anyone. Rains stepped closer, invading the sacred bubble of space around the guard's post. He lowered his voice, but the edge of it sliced cleanly through the hush. "Do you even know who lies beneath that stone?" he hissed. "You don't. No one does. An empty name. And you build a religion around it." Cole's grip on his rifle tightened imperceptibly, a twitch so small only another guard would have noticed. His gloves creaked softly. Inside his skull, his heartbeat slammed like distant drums. Jamie, Rowe, known only to him. He knew who lay beneath that stone. All of them. A flash of movement caught the corner of his vision. A veteran in a battered field jacket stepping forward from the rail, face red, eyes burning. An Arlington security officer gently pressed a hand against his chest, shaking his head. "Don't." The veteran froze, trembling, and stayed. The crowd was splitting now, not physically, but in silence, half horrified, half furious. Children stared with wide, confused eyes. A reporter lowered her camera and simply watched, mouth open. Somewhere, a service dog whined softly, unsettled. Still, Cole stood motionless. Rains let the silence stretch until it frayed, then delivered his next strike. "Soldiers don't need statues," he said. "They need leaders. They need someone to make sure their deaths meant something." This empty theater, the words echoed across the marble like a curse. Cole's chest rose once, steady. He felt the sweat cooling under his collar. The weight of the rifle on his shoulder was a steel anchor holding him to this earth. He thought of the long nights polishing that same rifle, until he could see his own hollow eyes in its barrel, of standing watch in freezing rain, in blistering sun, while tourists gawked, of learning that perfection wasn't just appearance, it was defiance. Defiance against time, against forgetting. His silence was not emptiness. It was resistance. Rains finally stopped pacing. He stood directly in front of Cole, just outside touching distance, staring up into the younger man's stone-set face. "You don't honor the fallen by pretending to be marble," the general said softly. "You honor them by becoming unstoppable." Then, almost mockingly, he leaned just slightly forward and whispered, "Move." It wasn't loud, but the words struck like a gunshot. A ripple shot through the crowd, gasps, a sharp intake of breath. A little girl clapped her hands over her ears. The veteran in the field jacket swore under his breath. Cole didn't move. The world seemed to tilt, holding its breath. Rains straightened, studying him with something like fascination or contempt. It was hard to tell which. "This," he said, gesturing sharply to Cole's motionless form, "is why we lose all this energy locked in glass cases, all this discipline wasted on nothing." He turned his back deliberately, sweeping his gaze over the crowd like a general surveying a defeated city. "Do you know how many of my soldiers I watched die?" Rains barked suddenly, voice booming now. No longer for Cole alone. Hundreds, and not one of them needed a statue. They needed victory. They needed action. They needed. He cut off, turned back, and for the first time, there was something raw in his face. Anger, yes, but something trembling beneath it. "They needed me," he finished quietly. No one moved. No one breathed. Even the birds circling above seemed to keep their distance. Cole's lungs burned from holding the same measured pattern of breath. He stood locked in that ancient rhythm, rooted like part of the tomb itself. Inside, though, a storm howled. He remembered the crater where Jamie had been. He remembered walking into the tomb for the first time, staring at the unknown inscription, feeling the weight of every forgotten name pressing down on him like gravity. And he remembered choosing silence as a weapon, choosing stillness as defiance. Rains stepped even closer, close enough that Cole could see the lines carved into the older man's face like fault lines on a battlefield map. You will blink, Rains whispered, so quietly only Cole could hear. You will break, because all statues eventually crack. Cole's eyes stayed fixed, unblinking, unbroken. Somewhere in the distance, a bell chimed the half-hour, and then, like a fuse reaching its end, Rains's composure flickered. The mask of cold authority slipped, just enough to show something seething and wounded underneath a man who had buried too many and now stood raging at a stone that refused to mourn with him. His next move would cross the line. For a suspended heartbeat, the plaza seemed frozen in amber. Rains stood inches from Cole, breath sharp in the cold air, eyes flashing with something unmoored. The crowd had gone utterly still, as if they sensed it too, that invisible tripwire about to snap. This wasn't simply tension anymore. It was ignition, waiting for a spark. A faint breeze whispered across the marble. The flag above the tomb stirred once, then lay still again. Rains moved first. It wasn't dramatic, not at first. Just a slow, deliberate lift of his hand. His fingers rose, hovering at shoulder height, then extended toward Cole's chest badge, the tomb guard identification badge, burnished silver, worn by fewer than 700 men and women in history. It gleamed like a shard of frozen moonlight in the sun. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Everyone knew the rule, even if they didn't know they knew it. No one touches the guard. Not the weapon, not the badge, not the man himself. This post was sacred. Physical interference was the one boundary. No civilian, no dignitary, no officer dared cross. And yet Rains's hand kept coming. Cole's vision narrowed to a tunnel, every nerve sharpened to a blade. Rains's fingertips were inches away. Then they touched the badge. A single, crisp tap of metal on metal echoed like a gunshot. Cole's body reacted before thought could form. A crack of motion shattered his stillness, explosive yet controlled. In one precise, practiced sweep, the butt of his rifle swung off his shoulder and snapped into the port arms position across his chest. The sudden motion hissed through the air like a blade. His boots slammed together with a seismic click that echoed off the marble colonnade. That the effect was instantaneous. The crowd gasped as one flinching backward. Cameras dropped. A child yelped in shock. The veteran in the field jacket actually shouted, "Yes," before clapping a hand over his mouth. Even the birds startled up from the lawn in a burst of wings. Rains froze. The rifle's bayonet was now gleaming inches from his chest. Cole's eyes bored into him like blue fire, still unblinking, but alive now, blazing with disciplined fury. Every line of his body was taut, electric, controlled like a coiled spring. His voice cut through the air like a command whip. "Sir, you are within the restricted zone of the tomb of the unknown soldier." The words were iron, perfect cadence. No tremor. "Stand back." The marble plaza rang with the sound. Rains blinked, genuinely startled, as if the guard had suddenly come alive from stone. His mouth opened, then closed again without sound. For the first time, his authority faltered. A ripple of murmurs broke through the stunned silence of the crowd. Phones rose again shakily, now recording not a still statue, but a sudden eruption of duty embodied. Cole didn't move except to breathe, a precise inhale, a controlled exhale. His rifle remained level, a silver line of warning. His boots stayed locked at attention, heels fused together. Rains slowly lowered the hand he'd used to touch the badge. His face had gone pale beneath its sun-creased lines. Cole's voice rang again, sharper this time, the edge of formal authority now fully unsheathed. "It is forbidden to approach or interfere with the guard. You will remove yourself from this space." Immediately, the words left no space for argument. They were not an opinion. They were law spoken not by a man, but by the tomb itself. Something broke behind Rains's eyes. Not anger now. Something deeper, something raw. His jaw tightened, but his shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly, like a great weight slipping from them. For the first time he stepped back, just one pace, but it landed like a retreat. The crowd exhaled as if they'd been holding their breath for hours. Someone actually applauded just once, then stopped, embarrassed. A teenage boy whispered. He made the general back off. In awe, Rains's gaze dropped briefly to the white marble beneath his boots. When he lifted it again, his voice had changed. It was lower, frayed, the iron gone soft at the edges. "Do you know how many I buried?" he asked quietly. It wasn't a challenge this time. It sounded almost like a confession. Cole's rifle stayed locked at port arms. His eyes never wavered, but something shifted in his silence. A subtle softening, like a mountain listening to the wind. Rains's throat bobbed. "Too many," he murmured. "Too many, and I can't remember their faces anymore." His voice cracked on the last word. The crowd fell utterly silent again. But it was different now. Not tense, reverent. The hard wall of hostility had fractured, and through the cracks seeped something heavier. Sado Rains looked at the badge he had touched, still gleaming on Cole's chest, and his lips trembled as if forming words he couldn't say. Cole spoke first, softly but clear, the ritual words every guard carried like blood in their veins. Here rests in honored glory an American soldier known but to God. The sentence floated through the cold morning like a prayer. Rains closed his eyes, a tear sharp, uninvited, traced down his lined cheek. He let it fall. When he opened his eyes again, something was gone from them. The challenge, the defiance. In its place stood only an old soldier, unarmed at last. Cole pivoted his rifle back to his shoulder in a single flawless motion. The click of metal on leather echoed like punctuation to a sentence only he could hear. He returned to his post stance, eyes forward, body carved back into stillness. Rains stepped back another pace, then another. His arms hung useless at his sides. He looked suddenly small against the expanse of marble. An Arlington security officer moved subtly closer, just in case, but Rains lifted a trembling hand to wave him off. He turned not sharply now, but slowly, as if the air itself were heavier around him, and walked toward the edge of the plaza. No one stopped him. No one spoke. As he reached the black rail, Rains paused and looked back over his shoulder at Cole one last time. His voice was barely audible, meant for the guard alone. "I've never heard anything like it," he whispered. Then he was gone into the waiting convoy, swallowed by the black doors, carried away like a ghost of an older war. Cole stood motionless, rifle gleaming, eyes fixed forward. The plaza was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now. A hallowed silence, the kind born when chaos bows to honor. For a moment, the world held its breath. The general's booming accusations still echoed faintly through the marble colonnade of Arlington, but his voice had lost its weight. After that single sentence from the tomb guard, that razor of truth that cut through arrogance like glass, everything changed. The crowd that had stood frozen now seemed to lean forward, drawn in by an unseen force, waiting for what would come next. The general's face, once steel-set and flushed with the confidence of unquestioned authority, had cracked. His mouth trembled as if he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. His chest heaved with shallow breaths, the rhythm of someone who had just been pulled back from a cliff he hadn't even realized he was standing on. The guard, meanwhile, remained perfectly motionless, rifle angled precisely at his shoulder, eyes forward. It was as if nothing had happened, as if he had not just shattered the ego of a man who believed himself unshatterable. Then, the sound of approaching boots broke the silence. 2 military police officers, summoned earlier by nervous officials, finally stepped onto the marble plaza. They slowed as they took in the scene. One of them actually hesitated mid the sight of the mighty 4-star general standing wordless, tears pooling in the corners of his eyes, while a silent tomb guard stood like a statue before him. It was almost unreal. One officer whispered to the other only shook his head, muttering, "Just watch." The general's shoulders slumped. He turned not to the officers, not to the stunned dignitaries watching from the steps, but to the guard, and in a motion that seemed to pull the breath from everyone present, he raised his hand in a trembling salute. A gasp rippled through the crowd. The guard did not move, not a blink, not a breath visible, but in the silence, something immense passed between them. The general's salute faltered midway down, and his lips quivered as if holding back a sob. His voice cracked. He paused, swallowed hard, and whispered, "I forgot." What this meant then, like a dam breaking, he stepped back, straightened himself as best he could, and turned sharply on his heel. He strode toward the exit not defiantly, but as if the weight of 1,000 forgotten oaths were pressing on his back. The officers followed behind him, their faces unreadable. As the general disappeared into the shadow of the marble arches, the plaza remained utterly still. Cameras clicked somewhere in the distance, but even that seemed muted, swallowed by the gravity of what had just unfolded. Reporters lowered their microphones. Veterans wiped their eyes. Children clutched their parents' hands, unsure why their throats felt tight. And the guard remained exactly where he was, every muscle locked in unyielding discipline. He had not moved during the confrontation. He did not move now. Slowly, almost reverently, the crowd began to back away. No one spoke. Even the birds seemed to keep their distance from the sacred stillness that cloaked the unknown soldier's tomb. It was as if everyone understood. Something profound had just been restored. By the time the guard's relief silently stepped out from the barracks to take the next rotation, the world had already begun to stir again. Phones lit up. Clips of the confrontation raced across social media at the speed of wildfire. Within minutes, millions watched the moment when arrogance bowed before honor, when power cracked, and duty stood unbroken. But the guard did not see the viral videos or the breaking headlines. He did not hear the flood of praise or the roaring debates on news panels. He simply executed the ceremonial inspection of his rifle, passed it with perfect precision to the next guard, and stepped off the black mat. His boots clicked in measured rhythm as he disappeared into the barracks shoulder square, back unbent, leaving behind a plaza steeped in silence and awe for the first time in hours. Someone spoke. A small child, perched on their father's shoulders, whispered softly, "Was he a hero?" And though no one answered, not a soul in that crowd doubted the truth, because they had just witnessed it. By the next morning, the world had changed. News networks across the country opened their broadcasts with the same haunting footage. A rigid tomb guard, standing immovable in the sunlit plaza, while a 4-star general lowered his trembling salute and walked away in silence. No commentary was needed. The images spoke louder than any anchor could. Clips of the moment flooded social media. Some were slowed down, others set to somber orchestral music, others stripped of sound entirely. Yet in every version, one detail captured people's hearts: the guard's absolute stillness. In an age of noise and outrage, that stillness became the loudest statement of all. Veterans wept watching it, teachers played it in classrooms, strangers wrote letters to Arlington, thanking a man whose name they didn't even know. Inside the tomb guard barracks, however, the man himself, Specialist Aaron Hale, sat alone on a narrow bunk, boots off, his posture finally allowed to soften. A small weathered dog tag dangled from his hand, its edges worn smooth from years of being thumbed like a prayer bead. It had belonged to Corporal Mason Pike. Mason had been Aaron's best friend in Afghanistan, the one who could make him laugh in sandstorms and hold him steady when the firefights closed in. One night, Mason didn't come back from patrol. Aaron had found the dog tag half buried in the dirt the next morning, glinting under the first orange light. He had carried it every day since, and it was Mason's memory that had pulled him to Arlington. He hadn't joined the guard for glory or ceremony or cameras. He had joined because the tomb gave meaning to silence. It gave meaning to every soldier who never made it home, including Mason. Standing watch here was his way of making sure someone was always there to remember. A soft knock on the door broke his thoughts. Colonel Rains, the commander of the tomb guard unit, stepped in. His face was solemn, but his eyes were warm. Without a word, he extended a crisp white envelope sealed with the emblem of the old guard. Aaron rose instinctively, heels clicking together. Rains spoke quietly, almost like a father. "The Pentagon has reviewed what happened yesterday. There will be no inquiry, no reprimand. In fact," he paused, then smiled faintly, "they called it the clearest act of honor they've seen in decades." Aaron said nothing. Words felt small. The colonel studied him for a moment, then did something no one expected. He raised his hand and delivered a sharp, flawless salute. Aaron's chest tightened. Slowly, deliberately, he returned it. Then Rains turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Off the record, son, I think you reminded all of us why this place matters." When he was gone, Aaron sat back on the bunk. He opened the envelope. Inside was a single medal citation, the Army Commendation Medal with a line written in pen at the bottom, "For standing when the world expected you to bow." His fingers traced the words. Then he tucked the citation away, pressed Mason's dog tag to his heart, and whispered, "We did it, buddy." Outside, the sun was setting over the marble plaza, casting the tomb in a blaze of gold. The crowd had long dispersed, the noise had faded, and the mat was clean and empty again. Soon another guard would march the 21 steps in perfect rhythm, as they had for nearly a century. And the world, perhaps for a while, would remember why. The plaza at Arlington was quiet again. The crowds had left. The cameras had gone. Even the echo of the general's boots had faded from the marble. What remained was only the steady cadence of a lone guard's measured steps, 21 across, a sharp click, 21 back, and the eternal watch over those who could no longer walk at all. Somewhere far away, television hosts debated what had happened. Commentators dissected it like a chess match. Politicians tried to twist it into speeches. But here none of that mattered, because the tomb does not care for applause or controversy. It only honors sacrifice. That day, millions saw something they had forgotten. That strength is not loud, and honor is not boastful. That sometimes the most powerful thing a man can do is simply stand when the world tries to move him. The 4-star general, once the embodiment of power, had broken down in front of a silent sentinel, not because the guard shouted, or fought, or resisted, but because he didn't. Stillness had defeated pride, and that stillness carried the weight of every soldier who never came home. As the sun slipped behind the colonnade, the relief guard came to take his post. The exchange was silent, precise, sacred, just as it had been for generations. The world would keep spinning, storms would rage, and men would rise and fall. But here, time would remain at attention. The guard's boots echoed in the twilight as he disappeared into the barracks, his duty complete. He did not see the headlines or the awards or the tidal wave of praise. He only knew he had done what he had sworn to do, honor the fallen, and maybe, just maybe, he had reminded the living what that meant. Tradition is not weakness. Stillness is strength. So if this story moved you, share it, remember it, and carry it forward, because silence like this deserves to be heard.